name of God, amen. How much is a mite? The widow's mite, that is. That's become the title of this story told in the gospel text we just heard. We know it isn't much, and this text, as in today, usually falls in what in the church we call stewardship, aka fundraising season. So I wondered, just how much did she give? Will it keep the lights on? Pay for the construction? The story tells us 2 small coins worth a penny, which was all she had. Wanting to be a bit more specific in what this really meant in Roman coinage, especially in the 1st century, I Googled it as a technologically savvy 21st century person does. But what came up from Google Autospell, or maybe AI, was not might, M-I-T-E, but the widow's might, M-I-G-H-T. Now, turns out, a mite, these 2 small coins, I did look further, are a 64th of a denarius, an 1/8 of a farthing. So now you know. It's back to where we started. No lights on, no construction pledge from this widow's contribution. But what about her might? What about her power? It is that widow's might we are invited to examine today. We may not think much about it, but there are actually quite a number of widow stories in the Bible. The New Testament and the Hebrew Scriptures. Hannah, the mother of Samuel, whose song was in fact the model of the Magnificat, which of course Mary sings when she goes to visit Elizabeth. There's Judith, who was able to care for her family and property and many others in her community. There was the widow of Zarephath, who hosted Elijah, making a meal out of all that she had, figuring next day would be starvation. But she gave it to Elijah and then survived. We have Ruth and Naomi from today. Naomi, who with cunning, I'm sure you all listened to that story very well, with cunning and faith, ensured that Ruth found a husband and bore a son, whose lineage was in the line of David and of Jesus. There are others, of course, and then especially the widow in today's gospel. And this widow's kind of might, M-I-G-H-T, came from a transformative love and a generosity of spirit, arising not from her wealth, but out of her grief, the depth of her heart, out of her poverty, which was all she had to give. Widows were not always destitute, as the Bible likes to make us think they are. In Jewish tradition, in fact, they could own property, like some I just mentioned, but as long as they inherited it from their father or their brother, or if there was no other male to inherit. More often, though, they lost everything at the death of the husband. They were not leaders in the synagogues or society. They didn't say long prayers, didn't have great robes, and were sometimes outcast with their now orphaned children, to be pitied and cared for, with a sense they cannot care for themselves, not having much to offer monetarily or otherwise. So this account of Jesus at the temple treasury is at its deepest level, of course, not about money at all. Certainly not a 21st century stewardship campaign pitch. Not about how much, not even if it is enough, but an inner power that this widow had. The world would name it as weakness, yet a power that transforms a would-be nobody into somebody. One whose heart and mind and soul are completely dedicated to that great commandment that love compels us to adhere to. For Jesus, of course, the widow is the heroine of the story, not for how much, but for the fact she gives it all of it. Whereas the scribes in their fancy robes with long prayers, who want to be seen, get a good seat in the synagogue, to be recognized, are, if not the villains, at least the pretenders in the story. So the moral of the story from Jesus' point of view is clear. The widow wins. But if I'm honest, I'll point the finger at myself. But I'd say that there is some scribe in each one of us. We do want to be recognized. We do want to have a good seat, even in an Episcopal church if it's at the back. We do want to say prayers, and we do want to give generously of our abundance. And only too often, or at least for me, most of the time, we want to hold back enough to hope and believe that we're a little bit in control of our lives, our families, the climate, politics. We'd rather not be the poor widow or even like her. We'd rather not have those times when we are broken or grief-stricken or have lost a family member or a loved one or money or property. Those moments when we are needy are not good moments, and we may lack the courage or the stamina to be in community with family, much less to go public with our poverty and to be in a public space and drop in our last 2 coins. Yet when we do, figuratively or literally, when we take the risk to be all in, to be in community with others, that is when, at least in my experience, I know that God somehow is walking alongside. God, and one who loves me, who may or may not be like me, is walking with me to help get us through. To help us too be like that widow, all in, all in. To give with heart and soul and mind, that transformation and renewal in community can happen. And the invitation is not to be afraid of giving from the heart, and it comes to scribe and widow alike. There's a great image at the end of this text, and maybe I've created it myself, but I love it. The scribes in their beautiful robes, having it together, they're going through the line, and they're giving big gifts, and that's wonderful. And they want some recognition for it. And there's the widow who's there too. She's right in line, claiming her own power. Perhaps from her poverty, perhaps from her brokenness, certainly from her difference from the others there, but from the place of her heart and soul, claiming that power to give. Even if the widow has taken the better part, we are all in it together. All of us, within all of our different selves, the whole gathering who are later going with Jesus to Jerusalem. It's an image, I think, that's not so different from our own world and our own country today. differences of heart and mind and spirit. I know that's been the experience in this country in the last week, in this election. And yet Jesus is with us here to claim again that we're all in it together. That in the midst of pain, community can nevertheless be formed. We can be a community of healing. This past week, there were several opportunities for folks to just be together in all of their differences. I was grateful to know that Evie offered one with the choir to sing with lighted candles and just be together, knowing we are a divided world, still called to be one. I went to the interfaith service at St. John the Divine. There at that service, there was every possible faith who was there. When we arrived, a candle was given to us, and then there were prayers, a word, a lot of silence, a promise to engage one another across difference. And then at the end, we raised our candles in the dark cathedral and knew that the light would shine among us, as is always promised. Yesterday, along with Megan and Hedon, I was and Jen actually, at the convention of the Diocese of New York. The title of this convention was Renewal and Healing, specifically relating to the diocese, which certainly needs it, and certainly is in a time of transition with a new bishop. But it's also a theme for all of us, for our world, for the convention, for Christ Church in our own time of transition. It's not an easy time. Any of you who's ever given birth, in medical terms, you know the transition part, that's when it's really, really painful. So just so you know, it's painful. And then the new birth happens, the promise is kept real, and we move on again. And so I want to claim that theme in thanksgiving for this place, for its promise, for its adventure, for its willingness to welcome everyone, and to know that whoever we are and all the parts of ourselves, widow and scribe alike, are welcome. We bring them here to be with one another, to love one another, to love God, to love our neighbor. And we, like that widow, are all in. May it be so. Amen.